What would you say was the biggest driver to the success that you experienced in WD-40?
Oh, no question. It was the culture, the will of the people. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have high will of the people, you're not going to maximize the outcome of the organization. It's all about the people.
When was the first time you saw yourself as a leader?
I guess my big awakening was after becoming CEO of WD-40. I was a leader up till then, but I wasn't the servant leader that I ended up being. I was the be brief, be bright, be gone, ambitious, get out of the way, we're going to get things done guy.
Do you find great people or do you build great people?
If we're talking about great people as leaders, they've got to really answer one question, and that is, do they truly believe that people matter in the organization?
Can you share with the audience, how did you start to introduce yourself?
G'day, I'm Garry Ridge. I'm the consciously incompetent, probably wrong and roughly right, chairman and CEO of WD-40 company, and I need all the help I can get.
So Garry, a repeat guest on Leadership on Purpose. So honored to have you back. I have to ask you, you were the CEO, chairman of WD-40 for 25 years. During that tenure, the market value of the company 10x'd, so around 250 million to 2.5 billion. What would you say was the biggest driver to the success that you experienced in WD-40?
Oh, no question. It was the culture, the will of the people. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have high will of the people, you're not going to maximize the outcome of the organization. So, we concentrated very much on having a good strategy, but we gave equal weight, time, talent, and treasure to building a culture where people went to work every day. They made a contribution to something bigger than themselves. They learned something new. They were protected and set free by a compelling set of values, and they went home happy. So it's all about the people.
What do you say? I think I know what you could say, but what do you say to the people that are the skeptics when it comes to culture and the soft stuff? They're like, oh, well, yeah, that sounds good. We want to love on people. We want to really invest in people, empower people, but we really need to make sure that we hit these results. What would you say to them? And then let me ask you this, maybe a different way too. Was there ever a time where you felt pressure from either investors or others to say, hey, we need to table some of this culture stuff, and we need to really buckle in on short-term results?
Well, the first thing I would say is this is not soft. This is hard. And the reason I say that is if it was soft and easy, we wouldn't have 70% of people going to work every day who are disengaged or actively disengaged. We would have 90% of people going to work every day who are engaged and passionately working towards delivering on the company. That would take me to the second point. You and I can write a really good strategy. Let's write a great strategic plan. We've identified the potential. We know the markets, the customers, blah, blah, blah. Get 70 out of 100 for your strategic plan. Some smart professors graded it for you. But if only 30% of your people are going to work every day executing against that plan, 30 times 70 is a number. If 80% of your people are going to work every day executing passionately against that plan, 80 times 70 is a bigger number. So we didn't 10x the value of the company. In fact, we went to 3.6 million, not 2.5. It's 3.6 billion. We didn't do it by not having a highly engaged workforce. We did it by having a highly engaged workforce. So for the skeptics out there, I'm sorry you are leaving so much on the table for you, whoever your shareholders are, by not concentrating on culture. The second part of your question is, did I ever get negative feedback? We're a public company, and the public company markets are very focused on quarterly results. I, from day one, said, don't follow us quarter to quarter. We're not smart enough to be able to run a business in 90-day intervals. What we did do is we said, this is our annual plan and what we want to do annually. And this is where you can expect we might be 5 years from now. And if you're going to watch us quarter to quarter, don't buy our stock because you'll jump off a cliff because we will go through all of the normal things that businesses go through. And if you're going to focus on that, you would even expect me to do unnatural things like not do the promotion that we need to do, not invest where we wanted to invest. And we're not going to do that. So if quarter to quarter is so important, you go buy someone else's stock. And if they bought ours, they were happy in the end.
I'll say they were happy. I love that. Let me ask you this, Gary. When was the first time, if you had to think about it, that you envisioned yourself, you saw yourself as a leader? Was there a point in your life where you realized, "Hey, I have something here that I can I can steward and I can really influence and lead people?" When did you first start to see that in yourself?
You know, as I write in the book, I was privileged to be exposed to a lot of different people in my younger lifestyle, in my younger life, whether it be, working in the local hardware store, the local sporting goods store. And I don't think back then I really knew what leadership was. And it's only when I, was able to reflect on that later in my life that I understood that leadership was about, you know, making people feel like they belong, making people feel like they matter, showing them what they do adds value, reducing fear, all of those things. So I I I don't
Mhm.
know. And then I guess my big awakening was when I went after becoming CEO of WD-40. I was a leader up till then, but I wasn't the servant leader that I ended up being. I was the be brief, be bright, be gone, ambitious, get out of the way, we're going to get things done guy. That got me to a certain stage, but what got me there was not gonna get me where I wanted to go. So, you know, Marshall's Goldsmith's book's great. What got you here won't get you there. And, it was when I went back to school and I met my dear friend and mentor, Dr. Ken Blanchard, and really learned the power of servant leadership that I really then understood what leadership was about. And it's truly about having the privilege to bring to an environment where other people can thrive.
I love that, and you had the book. If you're watching this instead of listening to it, you can see the book cover behind you. One of the best titles that I've seen for a business book. Any dumbass can do it. When you use that phrase, when you say that, Gary, what do you mean by that?
Well, that's a great question. Firstly, the word ASS in this title does not mean someone's posterior or bottom. It's relating to a donkey. And if you think about a donkey is a very rigorous, hardworking, stubborn animal that has gone a long distance and has a lot of a lot going on it. So the dumbass part is a donkey, but the donkey's not really that bright, right? But it knows a lot. So the essence of the book is that if you understand and you apply the principles that need to be put in place to build a great culture in an organization, it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you take in the attributes of the donkey, which is, I can carry a heavy load, I can go a long distance, I can walk the long way. Anybody can build a great culture in the organization.
How important for you actually, let me ask you this, can you share with the audience, how did you start to introduce yourself
Oh, yeah.
when you come into settings?
Yeah. I would introduce myself as G'day. I'm Garry Ridge. I'm the consciously incompetent, probably wrong, and roughly right chairman and CEO of WD-40 Company, and I need all the help I can get.
How important for you was humility in your leadership, and what power did you find in that kind of humility?
It's really important. I mean, a lot of leaders think they're corporate royalty. They're not corporate royalty. We're just average people, human beings. And, if you want to, value the input of others, you've got to create that psychological safety where they're not thinking that you think that you're someone that's way above. you've been given a huge responsibility, and your job is to bring out the best of other people. It's like being the conductor of an orchestra. If you think about the conductor of an orchestra, all they have is that stick, and that stick does not make any music. What it does, it helps the players in the pit know when to play their best music. And the conductor's job is to bring the different instruments in at the right time and to ensure that he has the right people in the orchestra pit with the right instruments and the ability to play at a level that's going to create that wonderful music that happens when he goes like this.
L- I want to get your take on this. Do you find great people or do you build great people?
I don't think it's an either or. It can be a both and. I think number one is, if we're talking about great people as leaders, they've got to really answer one question, and that is, do they truly believe that people matter in the organization? And that's important. And if they do, then, I coach now. One of the things I do is I coach CEOs. I
Yeah.
coach 8 CEOs at any one time. And the first thing we go through is we go through this process of awareness. What I've come to learn is most leaders really don't know how their leadership behavior impacts others. And so I use Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, by the way. And we look at those 20 habits. And I say to the person I'm leading, do you think you have any of these habits? And which ones do you think are more dominant in your leadership behavior? And they'll give me their feedback. And then I go out and I interview and talk to their stakeholders, the people that they have the privilege to lead. And I ask them the same question. And then I do a heat map and I say, this is what you said. This is what they said. Guess who's right? They're right. This is how you're seen as a leader. And then we look at what are these behaviors that we're going to now intentionally focus on shifting. For example, the stakeholders might say, Blake's not a very good listener. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to say to ourselves on a daily basis, did I do my best to be a better listener today? Or did I do my best to not add too much value today? Or did I do my best not to use how, but, or whatever today? And we go through that intention program for a number of weeks, months, and their behavior changes. And when you go back to the stakeholders, they say it's much different as a leadership group now because, he's learned to shut up.
That's powerful. Um, you mentioned Ken Blanchard, and I know from reading your work and reading your book, just how influential he has been for you in your life, Gary. Can you talk to us about that relationship in particular, and how did it kind of evolve? Like, is it something that you intentionally sought out with Ken, and then I guess extrapolating for other leaders, how important is finding the right mentor in leadership?
Well, um, I met Ken through circumstance. In the first chapter of my book, which is the first chapter is Are You Okay? I share with you my flight to Sydney. I was on a Qantas 747 traveling from Los Angeles to Sydney. And I'd been CEO for about 18 months of the company. And I knew how we could take the blue and yellow can to the world from a marketing standpoint. But always on my mind was how do we build a culture? And I didn't know if I even knew to call it a culture then, but an environment where people are empowered and they liked what they do. And I didn't know how to do it. And I was reading something on that plane. I'm 38,000 feet, 2 a.m. in the morning, somewhere over the South Pacific Ocean with a light coming down. And as you do, you take stuff to read. And I read a quote from the Dalai Lama, and that quote was, our purpose in life is to make people happy. If we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I wonder if we can make people happy in an organization. And happiness is not joy, joy, happy, happy. I saw it as more fulfillment. How could people be fulfilled in their organization? And then I read a second thing a little while later on the same trip. And it was from Aristotle, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And I thought, wow, that's so true. If people really enjoyed what they were doing, they would really do it better than if they didn't enjoy it. So this stuff's swelling around in my head, right? And I get back to San Diego and I'm reading something in the local newspaper about a master's degree in leadership at the University of San Diego. And I went, oh, and Ken was actually speaking at that event. And I went, I think I'll go. So I went to this, and it was an information session on recruiting people for this master's degree. And Ken was speaking, and he said something that I'll never forget. He said, most MBA programs get people in the head. We've got to get people in the heart, because that's the heart of business. And I went, so here I am. I'm already CEO of a US public company, and I went back to school. I went and enrolled in the master's degree, and I learned, and Ken was my professor, one of my professors. And I learned the power of servant leadership over 2 years in that degree. And I graduated with my degree in servant leadership. Um, During that, Ken and I became really good friends. We actually ended up writing a book together called Helping People Win at Work. The byline was, don't mark my paper, help me get an A. Ken
Yeah.
invited me to be on the board of his company. So I was on the board of the Blanchard companies for 10 years. And today we're very good friends. He wrote the foreword to my latest book. He's 85 now and certainly not as active as he was. And fortunately, he doesn't live far from me, so I get to see him reasonably often, and I just love the guy. And my life it would not be the same if it hadn't been for me being able to be exposed to, and for Ken to be as giving as he was. He's such a giver, or is. So to answer your question, you know, learn from everyone you can along the way, and you know, take what you learn and use what you think works and what doesn't work. And, I've had other people. Marshall Goldsmith's a great mate of mine, and I've been fortunate enough to learn from him, and Simon Sinek and a few others that, I've taken their work and I've practiced it, and then I've given them feedback on, hey, you said this should work. I've tried it. It did or it didn't. And that's how I built my relationship. So I feel very, 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 very grateful that I've had the opportunity to learn from, those folks. Ken's funny, I often say, Ken, I'm successful because of Aristotle, the Dalai Lama, and Ken Blanchard. He said, well, at least I'm in good company.
That's brilliant. He's a special man, and just seeing his legacy in you and what you did in the WD-40 culture, and now what you're doing with the other CEOs that you are now mentoring and coaching. That's the power of leadership. That's the multiplication effect of leadership. And it's there's so much leverage that comes from that. You talk about a lot about servant leadership. That's what Kim Blanchard is known for as well. Um, Where have you ever seen servant leadership when a company or an organization really goes that direction? Have you ever seen any pitfalls there where they maybe index too high on some things and not enough on other things?
Yeah, again, I say this is a balance between being tough-minded and tender-hearted. So, I have a friend of mine, Charlie Maloof. He owns a chain of Ashley furniture stores out in the Charlotte area. And he has a great saying. He said, culture is not a microwavable event. It takes a crockpot approach. And why I'm sharing that is, what are the ingredients that you need to put in place to ensure that you have a balanced servant leadership, that if you go too far to the tough-minded side, you end up with this toxic environment. If you go too much to the tender-hearted side, you don't have performance. So sure,
Sure.
great servant leaders love and involve their people. They're expected to be competent. They're connected with emotional intelligence. They spend a lot of time in what I call the stinky locker room. They love learning moments. They have a heart of gold, but they also have a backbone of steel. They're champions of hope. They know that micromanagement is not scalable. They always do what they say they're going to do, and they treasure the gift of feedback. So I think there's some of the elements in servant leadership that you have to really keep in mind.
Yes. Just from my experience, I can resonate with that, and I've seen some organizations that they have the heart for that, but the support level is very high, the challenge level is not very high, and they end up with, like, kinda blow up moments where it's like, "Oh, now we're past a point where we have to have a come to Jesus talk, and this is what's been going wrong. Well, why didn't you tell me that, months and months ago?" And it's because they weren't willing to actually do the accountability piece.
That's so
Um,
important, and, I just add one other thing, there's a friend of mine is Ron Carusi, he wrote a great book called To Be Honest, and he says, "Most leaders protect their own comfort zone at the expense of other people's development," which is exactly what you just described. We're protecting our own comfort zone, and the reason we do that in most cases is because we haven't been deliberate about setting expectations between us. You know, it's really hard to have a redirection conversation when you haven't been clear about what you expect from each other because it gets nasty. But if you and I, and this is part of mainly of the first book that I wrote with Ken, which is, don't mark my paper, help me get an A. The basis of that is have you clearly defined what an A is? Do I understand it? Do you understand it? So then when you have to have that redirection conversation, you can go back to, hey, like this is what we agreed to, you and I, we both agreed to this. And it seems like we're going off the path a little bit here. Is there something getting in the way here that we don't know about that we need to redirect? But if you haven't been clear, it's like, well, yeah, I didn't know that. You didn't tell me that. Why didn't you tell me that? You weren't clear about that. And that's where you get into this. And that's why people protect their comfort zone because they don't want to get into this.
and it makes it so much easier on you and your own back to your comfort zone if you've done a good job on the front end of setting those expectations. So it's to their benefit, it's to your benefit. I love you share that. I wrote down that quote. We so often leaders protect their own comfort zone at the expense of others' development. That's powerful. Um, so you talk about learning moments, Gary. You're famous for learning moments. What is the what is the tipping point in a learning moment where you can really capture insights? What is it about a learning moment that generates value for an organization?
So let's talk about the definition. The definition of a learning moment is a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared to benefit all people. So the first thing is, are we clear about the outcome we desired to get? So, clarity around, hey, this is what we went to do and it was successful and this is why. This is what we went to do and it wasn't successful. This is why. So you've got to have that clarity around, the desired outcome to be able to benefit from the learning moment. Now, interestingly enough, there's a really interesting story attached to WD-40 on this. I don't know whether I've ever shared it with you before, but back in 1953, there was a fledgling company in San Diego called Rocket Chemical Company. And Rocket Chemical Company was in the business of formulating solutions for corrosion and condensation in the space industry. There was a problem with condensation and corrosion in the umbilical cord of the Atlas space rocket. So two chemists got together and started to work on a formulation. So the desired outcome was a product to stop that, right? They started to work on it. Formula One didn't work. Formula 5 didn't work. Formula 10 didn't work. Formula 15, you know where I'm going on this? Formula 25 didn't work. 30 didn't work. 35 didn't work. 39 didn't work. 40 worked. Water displacement 40th formula, WD-40, was born. So that outcome was only because they were very clear on what the desired outcome was, and every formula that they went took them to the next learning for the next formula. So again, it's really important. What do we want to achieve? What do we try? What's the outcome? And then how do we learn? Because what I love about a negative learning moment, it's one step away from an amazing discovery.
I love that story. I'm so glad that you told that. You say in your book, Gary, that people don't intend to lie at work, but they do fake and they do hide. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I believe most people don't lie at work. I think they fake and hide, and the reason they fake and hide is because of fear. So our job is in an organization is to take away the fear that they have about being honest, or learning moments is the antidote to that faking and hiding. Is okay, be comfortable. Now, I must tell you that a learning moment is not a get out of jail card. There are learning moments that could be labeled as learning moments, but they're not. And that's when it comes to actions that are illegal, actions that, and I've had conversations too with someone where they've wanted to label it as a learning moment, but I've said, wait, 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 wait. Your competency level around this has been proven in the past to be one where you would not have got into this situation. So something happened here. It wasn't a learning moment. What got in your way other than, you know, the situation that you're describing. So that's powerful too, because it gives you the opportunity to redirect someone, but not in a overly critical, way, but to recognize that you expect a level of competence. You expect people to deliver at the competence level that, they are normally delivering at. And if they drop below that, you wanna know why. What's happened here? And in a lot of cases, it's something that's happening to them in their life, in this, everybody's going through their own personal hero's journey. And, we don't necessarily know what it is. We often hear about, do you know what's going on in the mind of the person behind you in the line at Starbucks? What are they going through in life today? We don't know, but everybody's going through something.
Very true. And one thing that stuck with me from our last conversation, Gary, was this concept that in order to innovate, which is so incredible about the very ethos of WD-40's company, you helped define a lot of these principles and culture, but even the product itself would not have been there without learning moments, right? So it's just amazing how that all came full circle. But one thing I took away was that in order to innovate, you have to have a permission to make mistakes. People need to feel that. And you said, "Hey, it's not as simple as just sending a memo out that, hey, by the way, guys, you have a permission to make mistakes." How do you actually what are the things that you did to create that kind of culture where there was a permission to make mistakes and that people could actually learn and grow?
Well, you had to build trust, and I think I might have told you the story about how I introduced the program. I came back from one of my classes at USD in my master's degree, and I dreamed up this thing about a learning moment in one of the sessions. I said, "Okay, Sunday I finished class. Monday we're going to put this into action." So I go out and I said, "Right, we're going to have a principle in the company. We're not going to punish people for making mistakes. We're going to push the word failure out. We're going to call things learning moments from now on. I want you to share with me, your positive and your negative learning moments. I want you to share them with everyone. We're going to make a whole deal out of this." And you know what I could hear in the background? "Oh, sure. Yeah, of course you are." So, I had to build the trust. So I said, "Okay, I'm gonna run a program and I'm gonna ask people to share their learning moments with me and on a monthly basis. And, we're gonna have monthly prizes. And at the end of the year, we're gonna have this big prize." I think it was a trip around the world or with them and their significant other. And beautiful. Gary's got a great idea here. So out I go. In the first month, I got 4 people that were brave enough. What did I do with those 4 people? I made heroes out of them. I They were the stars of Gary's CEO life. Oh, second month I got 8. What did I do with them? I made heroes out of them. So what I was doing is just demonstrating publicly in the organization that I really valued this, not to punish people, but I wanted to know. And then, we started to get hundreds, and by the end of the year, we had people just to absorb this. And, you know, even though I've left the company, now I know, and while I was there wouldn't be a day go by where I wouldn't hear someone say, I had a learning moment about that, or here's the learning moment. And, I know that that still lives in the organization now. I was listening to something the other day, and one of the folks there said, I had to learn. So learning moments is really embedded into the culture of the company. And it will be until someone is silly enough to take away the safety zone. And it only needs to happen once. And
Mm.
people will dive under the desk, and that'll be it.
That's a big insight. It's you have to it only needs to happen once to make people go back to fear and hide, um, versus in order to build that culture, you have to repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly show the trust and do the opposite. That's actually a big insight when it comes to building culture. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, I don't know if I shared with you before too, when I was at school, way back many years ago in Australia in high school, so many years ago, my science class, my science teacher gave me a petri dish, and they said, what we're going to do is we're going to grow culture in this petri dish. So what do you need to know? Well, you need to know the ingredients you need to put in the petri dish to grow the culture. And then you, as the owner of the petri dish, you have to do two things, and you have to do it consistently. You have to feed the good ingredients so they continue to grow, and you've got to immediately attack the toxins that once they get in there. Because if you don't attack the toxins, they will kill the good culture that quick. And that's, Simon Sinek in his book, Leaders Eat Last, he put a algorithm in there that says culture equals values plus behavior. And I said to Simon, you missed a word, Simon, times consistency. So you don't
Mm,
have to have, it's not just having the values in place and having the behaviors in place. You've got to consistently emphasize the values and make sure you're um, feeding the good behavior and attacking the toxins. And if you don't do that consistently, that petri dish will go sour really, really quickly.
consistency. That's a great addition there. Um, One of my favorite chapters in your book was titled "The Superpower of Dumbassery." I want you to come back to that. How would you coach someone on tapping into that and tapping into that superpower of being willing to present themselves in such a way that makes other people feel comfortable and not knowing everything? How would you coach this?
It gets back to being comfortable with being vulnerable, admitting you don't have all the answers. You asked me to quote I'm probably wrong and roughly right, and I need all the help I can get. So, again, it comes back to that word consistently. When you're the leader, or whether you're the CEO or a leader of a department or a group, people are watching you all the time. They're watching your behavior. My daughter is a dance teacher, and she said something to me years ago. She said, Dad, before you put a dancer on Broadway, you have to watch them dance off Broadway to see what steps they take to be a great dancer. And people are watching leaders like that. They at the spotlight's on us, and they're watching us all the time. So if you don't do what you say you're going to do, they'll they'll pick that out immediately. The other thing that's interesting too is as you become more influential as a leader, your suggestions become orders, whether you want them to or not. So you have to have a lot of clarity around, this is not an order. This is a suggestion. This is how I'm behaving. So the answer to the question is you've got to live it with being authentic and consistently. One of the things that I'm hopeless at what I do. I got to be reminded about things all the time. And I have this little notebook. I don't know if I showed it to you before.
I didn't see it last time, no.
Well, this is version, I don't know how many of these I've got over there that are filled with, notes. But on each one of them, I have this little plaque here. And this plaque says, Am I being the person I want to be right now? Now, that's the question you have to ask yourself is, who is that person? Because we are just these basic human beings bumbling our way down this pathway of life. And the world and will take us off our pathway. In fact, in the bushes along this pathway are these thieves that come out and grab us. They're thieves of short-sightedness, of anger, of greed, of all this yucky stuff. And we're sometimes in the bush and we're going, oh, this doesn't feel too bad. But if we don't get out of that bush and back on the path, we will never find our destiny. So I have this, and I must read this. I don't know how many times a day, and it says, "Who is this person? Who do I want to be? I want to be grateful. I want to be caring. I want to be empathetic. I want to be reasonable. I want to be a listener. I want to be fact based. I want to have a balanced opinion. I want to be curious. I want to be a learner. I want to throw sunshine, not a shadow." The other
Mm.
reason that this is important is you have no right to take your leftovers to anybody because you can be in a meeting and in an environment and you leave some of yourself there. But now you're going to another meeting to meet someone else or into another environment. You need to refresh who you are because that person deserves your full plate as well, not your leftovers. So, I don't know how many times I'd been coming out of meetings. I mean, okay, all right, I got to be grateful. I got to be caring. Okay, that's who I want to be. So, don't be afraid to have these things that remind you because the world will take it away from us. So we've got to be deliberate and consistent.
I'm personally so glad you shared that, Gary, because the time I've spent with you, I've been so inspired by who you are because you genuinely take an interest in the people in front of you. I've seen that. I've experienced that myself. You took the time to make me feel like the important one. And it's something that, a lot of people would look back and they'd say, "Oh, that's just, that person's personality. That's just who they are. It comes natural to them. It doesn't come natural to me." And there's probably a big piece of that where it's just a part of the way you're wired. But it's also like just a reminder of you do these things because you are intentional to do these things. You remind yourself, even like the visual you just shared, you remind yourself, hey, this is who I am. I am wanting to be, and this is the person that I'm pursuing. And it takes intentionality to actually lean into that. So I think about that as you're coaching other CEOs, even they're like, "Yeah, Gary, you're wired like that. I don't know that I am." Like, can you speak to that a little bit? Like, if someone's not naturally interested in others, not naturally curious, can you develop those things, and how do you go about that?
Yeah. So after going through the awareness process of the coaching program, we come up with 4 or 5 things that we want to work on. And I use what Marshall Goldsmith calls the daily questions. So let's say I was coaching you and we identified that you needed to be a better listener, you needed to not add too much value to situations, i.e., be a micromanager, and you needed to not start with but now, however, you needed to be more. You needed to build more personal relationships. I would have you ask yourself every morning, yesterday, did I do my best to be a better listener? Yesterday, did I do my best to not micromanage? And it's really that intention that happens over time and you would grade yourself from 1 to 10. And then every 2 weeks, I'd have a call with you and we'd go through your grading. And I'd say, well, like on that day, you were honest with yourself. You graded yourself a 5. You didn't do your best. What were the triggers? What happened? What was the circumstances? How can we think about that? I will give you a guarantee. If you identify the behaviors and you're intentional about being aware of doing your best, it's not did I, it's intention. Did I do my best too? And you do it over time, it will change. It changed for me. It will change because I had so many bad behaviors that I needed to get rid of. And it's until I started to remind myself of what the good behaviors were that I forgot the bad ones.
That's encouraging. What is I've got to be able to let you go here, Gary. I could talk to you all day, and it's been such an honor. But as you think about the next season for you, what are you pursuing?
Well, I have a purpose now. You might have a different purpose before, but I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire a happier, more connected world. That's my purpose.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I will say this book is one of the best books that I have encountered in the sense that it feels like it's like talking with you.
Hmm.
Like you're actually here, even like it just feels so conversational and it feels um just practical. So I'd really, really highly recommend it. And Gary, I just want to thank you so much for coming back onto the show. You're a legend to so many of us, and we just really appreciate who you
Yeah.
are.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the feedback on the book because the intention was to write a book where we were having just a chat, and I'm very grateful. My co-writer and Martha Finney, who helped me with the book, was just an absolute genius. She took my thoughts and wove them into this tapestry that was so beautiful, and we just wanted it to be like, hey, let's sit down and have a conversation about a journey of leadership, and that's what I wanted it to be. So that's touched my heart. Thank you.
Well, it really came through. There's not many business or leadership books that have that type of tone, so I think it's very special, very unique, and encourage everyone to go get it.
Thank you. Well, keep
Thank you,
doing what
Gary.
you're doing. It's for people like you we need. You're helping us amplify how we can make the world a better place. So thank you. You deserve the credit.
Thank you, sir. Have a great one.
Thank you.